record. Okay, we are hot and we are here with Wendy Farone, Dr. Wendy Farone, mother and theologian. And we've had, but mostly confused. That's according to Wendy, not me.
That's exactly right.
And I am so happy that we're doing this. I cannot tell you how much I enjoy our conversations. And, you know, we've had some phone conversations during the COVID, but this is the first time I've really seen you face to face and, you know, virtually. But we used to go out to breakfast and have these great conversations. And, you know, speaking of theologian, you know, I got to use like the words like, I get to use words like eschatology and ontology, and you knew what I was talking about.
I do.
And I don't get to do that. I don't have to pull any punches when I'm using vocabulary and we don't with each other. And that's why it's so great because you know, we can talk about stuff.
Yeah. And even if I don't know what you're talking about, I'll act like I do.
So. Same here. I'll go home and look it up, you know, and I'm like, that's always a stimulating conversation when I have to consult my dictionary afterwards and go, how do I spell that? You know,
I know.
How do I spell Tertullian? You know, like you guys know what we're talking about. So the audience knows what we're talking about.
Let me give you a little theological tip here because talking about eschatology.
Yes.
For folks who are bothering watching this, eschatology means conversations about the end times, right?
My favorite times.
That it's like Revelation and holy cow, the whole world's going to explode. Well, the whole point of eschatology is the coming of the kingdom.
Right.
So it is actually celebration.
That's what I mean. It's a good thing. You know, it's like everybody was like 2012. I was like, bring it on, 2012. Let's go.
I was around when the clock turned to 2000 and we were all going to explode.
I remember that. I was at a New Year's Eve party. And there was one guy from there were a bunch of us that were roommates in college, and hopefully we'll get some of these guys on this show at some point. But I remember we were having a New Year's Eve party in 1999, partying like it was 1999. And actually it was pretty sedate. But the one guy, Will, he couldn't make it because he had to be on call in case Y2K made all the computer, airplanes dropped from the sky and who knows what. So.
They didn't know what the computers were going to do when they rolled over to the, isn't that something?
I know. We dig our own graves, right? We make our own problems. We weave our own webs and we get caught in them, you know?
So I got to tell you, I think the idea of everybody wearing sunglasses is really very niche-y and I love it, but I have to explain these weirdos.
Please.
These, as we were talking earlier, these are like Max Headroom glasses because they're really square, but they're also look like the Partridge Family bus. So I've been spanning a couple generations there.
If you can't find Max Headroom on YouTube, which you'll be able to find it, but if you can't, look up The Art of Noise. There's this great song called Paranormia where he like is in the music video and he does these weird faces and dances. I absolutely.
Yeah. So, that was high tech back in the day.
Oh my gosh, that was cutting edge.
Head in a box, right? Yeah, hilarious.
Now we're gonna have robot servants that bring us coffee and you know, and who knows what's next. You know,
I'm okay with that if they're bringing
houses. Coffee. Yeah, well.
Although I'll tell you what, I have not been in a grocery store and I can't tell you how long because I have like Instacart. Ding, come to the door. If I want like Chipotle. I get on here, ding, it's at the door. It's really made me lazy.
I tell you, I hope a lot of those services survive. I did the same thing. I needed turtlenecks for work when I was going to go back to work. And it was like, I ordered them from Kohl's. I drove up, I went into the little thing. There was a lady there like, here you go. And, remember, if you had tried to do that 10 years ago, you would have, well, first of all, you'd have to be infinitely wealthier than I am. You'd go to like one of the boutique stores, like one of the department stores, and you'd have to have a personal shopper. And how much money would you have had to pay for that service, right?
Oh, yeah.
And now anybody can do it and they're happy to do it. It's great. Talk about service. Yeah.
I was thinking about, we were talking about this in church today, and we'll talk about, I don't just do theology, but we can
No,
talk.
no, but that's the thing that stood out in your bio.
Yeah.
Right?
We were talking today about um, how much COVID has pushed us. It's not even a nudge or a tap. It shoved us into the use of technology. And it's not a bad thing because I think for us, we have now what is now live streamed, our services and all those kind of things. I used to put my phone on a little tripod, and I do Facebook Live of just the readings and the sermon part because they weren't copyrighted. And then this turned into, well, we've got an awful lot of people because of COVID who are home. Now, what do we do? So we bought cameras and equipment. I don't do it anymore. It's way over my pay grade, but I am amazed by the sound quality, and we will not get rid of live streaming. I've had people call or text me and say, I'm laying on a beach in Florida and I'm watching church. I'm in the ER and I really needed to see this today. It's that kind of stuff. We're really bridging a gap of communication, which is critical.
I think, I mean, one of my there are multiple motivations for doing this format that I'm doing here. And thank you so much for, you're like my fourth guest. And it's, I felt like when one of the things that helped me through COVID was watching these types of conversations between people, artists talking about their processes with other artists, musicians, just people, even like Russell Brand, like talking about like his, fleeing from fame and his ideas and his insights, and just and people opened up, because they were missing that human interaction element. And I need that. I'm a social creature. And I also, this is documented now. Like this will be on the interwebs, and for better, I believe. But it's at any point somebody could access this and say, "Wow, well, I never really thought about that way before." And which we always did with books before, and now we can do it in a more convenient way, and don't get me wrong, I love books, and we'll talk about the writing process because that's something we both love. And that even though we have this, there's something that the art of writing, the actual physical act of writing, and I'm sure you'll back me up on that, just does something to the human brain that this does. This fulfills another spot. But tell me about your writing process. Tell me.
So I'll give you a little insight on why I know anything about the writing process in the first place is because I am actually an educator, and I've been in education for 30 years, and I just retired about 8, I don't know who's counting now, about 8 months ago. I retired because I could. And I started out as a classroom teacher, and then I was like 25 at the time I set my toe into college. I never went to college. My family didn't do that. We just didn't do that. So I was the very first one in my family and extended family who'd ever gone to college. And I was 25. I had 2 kids, 2 beautiful girls, and a husband who ended up having a brain tumor in the middle of all of that, right? So I'm going to college, driving an hour and a half one way to go to college, taking my daughter with me, my one daughter, and driving her with me to put her in daycare or on campus. He was at home with the other one, and he gets a brain tumor. Now he can't work, and I'm not working, I'm in college. So what does that do to a person's character? Well, it can make you or it can break you. You can be stuck in the victim mode, or you can be a person who rises above and learns from the experience. Well, thanks be to God, I went the other way with it and rose up. My husband was fine, had to have major surgery, like it's in the Journal of Medicine kind of surgery.
Wow.
And so he's fine. And then I decided I've gotta work. So I graduated with my elementary education degree. Then I went to I've always been a reader and I've always been a writer, but not like a writer of like books I never wanted to be a book writer or a poem writer. I just write about what's going on in my head, which is scary enough. But but
So you journal. You're like a
journal. That's
a
what I do.
diarist, a log. You log. Yes.
Yes, I got boxes and boxes and boxes of a daily journal writing.
Nice.
And so yeah, so education was my way to get a semblance of independence. I ended up moving to Pittsburgh about 18 years ago because I was going into the bathroom when somebody was coming out of the bathroom at a conference. And the conference was here in Pittsburgh. And that person said to me, "Hey, I saw that you had mentioned something about some research that you were doing." And I said, "Yeah, it's part of my doctorate degree." And he said, "I need you to talk to somebody." Oh, okay. I don't know who you are. All right. And I'm from like Podunk. Seriously, I'm from Podunk. And so like downtown is a crossroads.
Podunk, population 2. Yeah.
We thought we were special. But so yeah, the following Monday, I was in an office down here in Pittsburgh where at the time I thought, this is the land of where they kill people. So you don't ever go to the city. It's scary down here. I'd never been on a plane in my life. Podunk, I'm telling you, I loved it. It was like Mayberry. So ended up moving down here 18 years ago. 2 years in about, we got a divorce after 28 years of marriage because he hated it here.
Oh.
And I loved it here. Two paths diverged in a wood, right? No problem. Because I had been through so much that I became independent, very independent. My upbringing was one of, there was a lot of alcoholism and a lot of physical abuse. And so my independence was my response to taking control of that, I think.
So you had a healthy response to a really potentially negative situation.
Right? Yeah.
So when you mentioned this to me the other day, your first plane trip was to Oxford, to go to Oxford.
Yeah. Yeah. I won an academic scholarship to study British literature. It was called British Literature and Life at Exeter College, part of Oxford, right in England. And I'd never been on a plane before, and off I went. See, you just got to leap, I guess. I was scared, but did it anyway. And that was just an incredible thing. I did a lot of British literature, but I did a lot of life while I was out.
So you were talking about transitions. It's kind of, I think, been a theme that you've been thinking about lately. Transitions. So that was definitely a transition.
That was huge. Well, getting a divorce after 28
you just go
years.
from a time zone. You went from a continent to another continent.
Yeah, having never flown. And then, things like you get a divorce when that's this man and that family structure is all you've ever known. And then you move into a city that you don't know. And then, I got a job with the State Department, and that was great, but I traveled a lot. And then I got a job, part-time job. I kind of overlapped them. I did it for 10 years, and I got to travel all over the United States, like plopped in the middle of the Indian Nation, plopped in the middle of some little Davenport, Iowa, and you just figure it out. You just figure it out.
So having traveled like all of these different places, and especially seeing the cultural differences, like when Native Americans went, are people just people, or like, are there like, is it like, wow, this is a real culture shock, like Iowa is so much different than Pennsylvania. I mean, I'm sure it's probably both, huh?
Yeah, because they hired me to do a training that I was extremely familiar with, which was how to teach the neurological pathways that have to grow in order for you to be a reader and a writer.
Oh.
So there's a long circuitous trip to get to the writing process. But what I did was nationally train people on how the brain works when we read and how to teach children according to the scientific research around how the brain works when it reads. So
Wow.
that's in kids with dyslexia. And so the district hired me on purpose. So there were a couple teachers that I didn't see any that were an issue when I was hired outside of the state. Ones inside the state, I had some issues with,
Mm.
because they were not going to change. That's the end of this story, right?
Okay.
And I said, well, I didn't get cocky, but I got confident. And I would say things like, well, that's between you and your administrator. Take it up with him. I'm here to do this job. Enjoy it or don't. I mean, my job isn't that you enjoy it. My job is that we learn together. And it's not about us, it's about kids.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, so I retired from that for 30 years. And the reason why you were saying, that you become, your whole mind and spirit gets involved when you write is because the whole left side of your brain has to be engaged in order to be a writer. So if you are just listening, you're only using this side of your brain. If you're spelling and such, you're using more parts. But if you are a writer, the whole brain is just firing to get a cohesive thought on the paper.
That's
now, the
interesting.
artsy people like you and Tara have a lot of on the right side of the brain.
Well, I'm also left-handed, so who knows what's going on. That
you're a mess.
That corpus callosum is probably like this thick, it's probably so. But I noticed, like, when even in college or even today, I will write anything that I want to remember. I will write because that process seems to etch it into my mind.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
I write down everything. I write down everything. We've been in meetings together where I've written down everything. And the reason why I write it, I never even actually go back and read it.
No, exactly. It's more of a processing. It's not that I want to refer back to my notes, although occasionally I think that somehow it's nice to know that it's there, but it's really about putting it in my brain. And then, but there is a visual element to it because I am a visual learner and I'm a reader. So I'm not saying I have an eidetic memory. I don't think I do, but every once in a while, if I'm looking for a quote, I can go to a book that I've read, usually something I've read a couple times, and I sort of know where on the page it is. Oh, that's on the left-hand that's in the left-hand page towards the top. I won't be able to like look at it in my mind and go, oh, that's page 73, but but I sort of have it. So that's maybe a partial thing going on there.
I can't remember if I had lunch. So that's pretty impressive.
Oh no. But then there are other things that I totally cannot remember. It's so selective. It's just, I don't know why. I think at some point I heard an analogy of it being a crowded attic. And when you add something more, you're pushing it in the door and something's falling out the window. I don't really believe that, but it's a neat visual image, and sometimes I blame it on that,
It has a lot to do with what was happening at the time you made the memory. So you'll remember what song was on the radio if you're in a car wreck. That's, you'll be, I remember Stairway to Heaven was playing.
Yes.
Yeah.
That is so true. I used to use that as a technique, actually, when I was in school. When I was in college, I would listen to specific music before I would go, while I would study. And then as I was walking to go to my final or whatever, or midterm or whatever, I would listen to that music and use it as a memory aid. So the Talking Heads' Road to Nowhere was one of my ironic songs.
That's great.
For my college education.
Oh,
I remember
man.
listening to that one.
That's great. Yeah. So, you think about another big transition was deciding after 30 years in education, which really, your identity all across the nation, people know me as the reading person, right?
Right.
And at 30 years, and I still do some private consulting with some states, but I decided that I was going to go to seminary.
After 30 years in education.
Yeah.
So you're starting an entirely new field of education.
Because I think
of study. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm not there to be ordained or anything. I'm there because I'm just intrigued and I'm interested. And if I can turn that into something that's helpful for other people, fine. I don't want a job that relates to it. I just want to learn and learn so I can be helpful to other people. I think my calling, if it's such a thing, is to be helpful to other people based upon that book of direction. And so if that's the case, I learned. So I'm going to seminary. I'm doing theological studies as my program, and I'm 4 classes in, and I forgot how hard it is to be in college.
Really?
It's really hard, mainly because, and I'm only doing it a class or 2 at a time, so I've got that advantage. But a lot of that stuff in the attic doesn't want to move. So when I shove something in, it just
You got to
falls.
free up some hard drive space here. Is that what you're saying? Yeah. I said I got to do a mental defrag every once in a while myself. No, I know what you're saying though about the religious studies. I mean, the reason I know the word eschatology comes from the fact that I took an elective in college. It was Varieties of Early Christianity by this wonderful lady, Dr. Paula Fredrickson, who I think is Princeton now or something. And I got, lucky. Somebody said, "Oh my God, yeah, you got to take her course." And I learned so much, and it had nothing to do with my field. And I, thank goodness I took it as an elective as a senior, or I would have declared a new major, because it was so fascinating.
Yeah,
and it ties into another area that, because if you're going to study early Christianity, you almost have to be a Roman historian as well. And at least the early empire. And I personally love the Republic. That's what I study, is like the Second Punic War, that kind of era. But it all blends together. So you kind of it's like if you study the American Civil War, you kind of have to know what came before it and what came after it. Otherwise, out of context, it really doesn't make as much sense. So, the same thing with Roman history. So, and Christianity is a huge part of it. So, they complement each other, and and it just adds another layer to the understanding of how culture develops and how it's influenced by the spread of ideas, and that's really like what we're doing here. I mean, Paul was like the internet, like Paul, he was like his own web server. He just spread all this stuff out there, and and others as well. But he's the one that we know the most about.
Yeah, that's right. Well, because he wrote majority of it. I mean, that the epistles are huge.
His survived.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he wrote a majority of the New Testament, and that's why that's fall in that direction. I just find theology fascinating because of I don't know, if I didn't listen as I was a kid, I hadn't been to church in 15 years when I moved to Pittsburgh, and 5 years ago I walked into this church and something happened. I don't know what it was. I just knew I was home and I was in the right place. And from that has spun a ton of things. So I didn't have to worry about what I was going to do when I retired, because I knew exactly what I was going to do.
Yeah, see, that's awesome, because I think what happens is a lot of people quit their jobs and they go, what now? And it's like, I always joke, I'm not old enough to golf. So my golfing buddies hate that. They hate when I say that.
Yeah.
I'm like, nah, yeah. You want to go golfing? Nah, I'm still young.
No, yeah. My knees don't hurt enough yet.
They hate that. I'm like, let's go play tennis. They're like, what? Tennis? Yeah, you don't want to break a sweat. But off camera, we were talking about Marcionites. Remember we were talking about Marcionites and how much they loved the letters of Paul.
Yeah.
But they only liked Luke. They only liked that one gospel for some reason.
Mm-hmm.
And you were studying Luke while we were talking about this, which it's not a coincidence for, whatever reason. These things they transmit through the ether somehow. And we know
I
know.
Well, there are no coincidences. You can notice them or not notice them. I think they happen all around us. I just don't think we're aware of majority of them. It's like that experience when you see a new word and you look at it and you think, oh my gosh, I've seen that 4 times today. I never saw that word before, and now 4 times I've seen the thing. It's just lack of awareness.
Well, I don't remember the person who said it, but he said something like, the universe is full of wondrous things that are just waiting for our senses to grow a little bit sharper.
Yeah.
you
Yeah,
know?
that's the truth.
Yeah.
That's the truth.
Yeah.
Well, you don't know what you don't know, and you can't be sensitive to something that you're unaware of. And so the whole idea then as a person is to become extremely sensitive to things.
I
To
think
know it.
so. It's an
Yeah,
evolutionary process. It
yeah,
evolves. It's like you might be dimly aware of it at one point in your life. It's almost like, through a glass darkly kind of, a quote
yeah,
we were saying. And it's like, and then all of a sudden, boom, it hits you, you know. And it's
yeah.
like that with like creating art and writing as well. I know like uh, we were talking about the Romans and we were talking about the ancient Christians.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
you know that Tara and I have a pottery studio and
Yeah.
we had to close it because of COVID. But like one of the first things I ever threw was a failed pot, and I pulled it out and you could see it kind of like slumped over the poor thing. Like it was
Oh,
supposed to
yeah.
be a bowl. But what I wrote on it on the inside, I don't know if you've ever seen this before. Have you ever seen that? So
Oh,
this is what some people call a magic square, but it's actually it's a magic square because it's the same going up,
yeah.
down, and reverse, right?
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
So this is Latin,
Yeah.
Sator arepo tenet opera
Uh-huh.
rotas, and it's roughly translated as farmer arepo. They just think that's a name, and
Okay.
has a work wheel. So the farmer has a plow basically.
Hmm.
And the thing was, this was used apparently by early Christians, this to identify themselves so as
Huh.
not to be persecuted, but it was like an identifying marker, like, yes, this is a house where a Christian lives. And if you're a Christian, you can come in and stay the night. Don't tell the Roman authorities, like that kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's like a
Yeah,
secret
yeah, yeah.
symbol. But it was also supposed to, I always find it fascinating because other people have described this to me as it was also a magical hex. They thought that Satan didn't like puzzles. So if you put it on your front door, he'd get stuck there trying to figure out what the heck is this all about. And he'd forget why he was going to come into your house and do whatever he was going to do,
Mhm.
mess up your dinner or,
A little blood on the lintels will work too.
I think there's a whole like feast about that, isn't there? Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And then on the side, I also heard that like early Christians would draw in the sand, they would draw a figure, they draw like half a fish, and then the other person would draw the other half. So that's on
Yeah.
the other side.
They knew they were among friends. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
To
that's
know
pretty
that
cool
like if you
stuff.
didn't know the secret symbol, so
Yeah.
that's how people protected themselves.
Yeah, for sure. So, we were talking about the transition thing, and a lot of it is transitions and attempts because I learned more from the attempts than the actual transition itself because the transition is occurring, but the attempt is like you take a step forward and two back and a step forward and two back, and truly I took the road less traveled by. That has made all the difference because I didn't know. When you live in a little town and you're sequestered, right? And then you get to a city and you realize there's more to it than what you thought. And then when you live here for a while, and you still can't figure out the roads, but you look around and you think, I had no idea they had that many little small cabarets and theaters around here, around the city.
Yeah.
And I had no idea they had, right? So I went down this last past winter and looked at the creche, which is huge and it's gorgeous. But I also read the history of it and how it was made and who was involved in making it. Incredible backstory. So that's why my pastor and I do a podcast called Bethlehem Back Chat.
Yeah. Plug the podcast. Tell everybody
Yeah,
where they can get that and where, because that's a wonderful. I've listened to a couple of them, and I really need to put that
yeah.
on my weekly like listening thing.
Well, because I'm such a lay person that I have all these questions, and my pastor is so fantastic. He doesn't shy away from anything. So I'll say things like, "What the heck do you do that for?" Or "What's that thing? Why do you cover the chalice with like 8 different layers of stuff?" And he gives you the answers, and he tells me all those.
Nice.
So I ask all kinds of weird questions. But
So,
the
yeah, tell us like the technical, like where can these guys find the podcast?
Oh yeah. Well, we're on Spotify
Okay.
and we're on Amazon Music,
And it's,
and
what do they
we
type?
are. It's everywhere. It's
What do they
everywhere.
type? What do they type in?
Bethlehem Back Chat.
Bethlehem Back Chat. Okay.
Yep.
Gotcha.
Yep.
Awesome. Yep.
Here's how weird it is. This is how we got to it. My pastor was inviting me into membership at the church, right? And he said, "Hey, you want to meet at Starbucks for coffee?" I said, "That'd be great." We're chatting about a couple things. I think this is the second time we met. And something said I didn't know anything about a podcast. I don't know. So I looked at him and I said, "Would you be interested in doing a podcast?" And he said, "Isn't that funny? I was going to ask you the same thing."
Amazing.
Oh no. 35
Unbelievable.
podcasts later. Yeah.
How many?
35.
Wow. That's fantastic.
And I learned how to run. I have a H6 recorder, and I have really nice microphones, and I write a script, and I know how to edit with Audacity, and I send it to Auphonic for post-production. Up it goes into Buzzsprout. What the heck? There's some news.
You learn as you go, I mean, the thing is, unless I need to do it, like, don't get me wrong, I'll sit and read a history book, but like, but usually it's because there's a question I had in the last book I read, and there was a note in the bibliography that you can find more about this here. I can't tell you how many books I got from bibliographies. And unfortunately, a lot of these, what I read is ancient history. A lot of these just go to dead ends because they'll cite a text that was written in 1910 and is in German and has never been translated in English. And I'm like, well, I guess I got to learn German now. It's like, what the heck,
What the heck?
Why hasn't anybody translated this in 111 years? Like, come on, guys.
Yeah, well, because it didn't hold enough public interest, or somebody who was a German translator major in college didn't think that book would be worthy of their time.
Well, eventually what happens is you get so niche, you get so into details that this guy's talking about popular theory of how many people lived in ancient Athens, and and nobody cares except me. And like, and so, eventually you're like, well, somebody cared enough to write the book, but in German, but I guess no English speakers care.
It's the same thing with the biblical scriptures. You just run out at some point where they find the Dead Sea Scrolls, or they find something, and then you're into, well, what do you think they meant? They said when they said.
Isn't that fascinating? I mean, we could talk about the Nag Hammadi library for like ages. I mean,
crazy.
We want to talk about that. When we were talking about Tertullian, we were talking about Irenaeus, we were talking about, that's all we had to go on with Christian Gnosticism for the longest time, because we didn't have any of their original texts, except some people say that John, except for the resurrection, might have been basically, some people say that might have been basically a Gnostic gospel. But once you get the Gospel of Thomas, once you get that stuff, and that's only been since 1935. So I don't even know if all of that has been translated.
It's not part of the canon unless it's Catholic.
Oh, believe me. Yeah.
The Protestant, it's not part of the Protestant canon.
Yeah, this is all heretical. So like, you're taking your soul in your own hands, guys. But if you're looking at it from a scholarly point of view, I'm not saying you believe it. I'm just saying you look at it. There's some really poetic stuff. There was, I was explaining this to a friend the other day, because he was like, Gnosticism, what's that? I know what an agnostic is.
Yeah.
So, well, Gnosticism, obviously, meaning not, knowing, gnosis is knowledge, knowing, right? So these guys claimed that they had some secret knowledge that others didn't, right? So what they would do is they would go to the same services, but then they would recruit people in the congregation. They'd be like, hey, you seem like you're pretty hip. You want to know what that guy up there is really talking about? It's kind of not, it's not really what, we know the thing, come to our thing. So then they would, they'd have their own little private meetings and such. And the idea was, one of the ideas, and like I said, this is totally heretical. So like, just throwing this out there, this is, it's like Dan Brown, stealing everything from the guys that wrote Holy Blood, Holy Grail, which I still, and if you're out there, I want to interview you about that. How did you feel about that? But, because actually Tara's reading Holy Blood, Holy Grail right now, because I recommend it.
Man.
So, Yeah, but it's like they thought that there were two gods. There was a God, a creator God, and that's how they explained evil in the world and sickness and all that kind of stuff. That the creation is imperfect. It's good, but it's imperfect. And that there was another God, and that's God of the new covenant, God the Father, and he's the kind, loving God. And the way they knew that was they could go outside at night and they could look up at the firmament and they could see that there were tiny holes, and that the creator God had put a drape over the earth around the atmosphere, and that it wasn't even perfect, that the perfection of the light was seeping through. And that's how you could know, because the love was behind that and it was trying to reach us. And I just like, when I read that in college, I was like moved to tears. I was like, what a beautiful like analogy, even if it's not right, it's just beautiful,
Well, poetic. I mean, most of the Bible, like you read a parable and you're like, what?
Right.
What's he talking about? The digging beneath it and tearing it apart, reading ancient scripture is not easy. It can be in English. The translation of it is extremely difficult. And we were talking about the class I'm taking right now is on something called exegesis, which is exgesis, which is where you dig down to find all that stuff out, as deep as you can go. You rip it all apart. Holy cow. I'm like, I opened up the Pandora's box, right? It's like, the more you know, you do not know.
Literally. I mean, the Pandora story, we could go, I don't know if you know about that one, right? So, hope is in the bottom of the box, right? Well, that's hope has a couple of different meanings, right? In English. But the word hope actually comes from the Greek word that they use when they talk about that in, I think it's Hesiod, is elpis, okay? And elpis can be translated as hope into English, which is the little bird with wings that, Emily Dickinson talks about.
Oh, the feather.
Or it could be expectation. And we all know about expectation, right? So was hope a blessing that was in the box? Because the box was filled with a bunch of evils.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that the Greeks were really ironic. They were talking about hope. They were talking about expectation.
Well, I think it's where the phrase maybe becomes pertinent is be careful what you wish for.
Exactly. And don't set the bar too high, because you're going to set yourself up for disappointment,
Yeah.
Yeah. So the Greeks always like that duality, and that's bled into Western culture. And I often argue against that because, not everything is two polar opposites. Not everything is up and down, I mean, a lot of times it's a continuum, and there's elements of both poles, even if it's bipolar, which a lot of times I just don't think it is. It's just an oversimplified way of describing the universe. But
when you think it's a major bell curve, there's always going to be tails on both ends, right? But it's not the majority. The majority is in the points in the middle. And it's like a spectrum where you can have more of or less of. Some are closer to what we would call the normal curve, or farther away. And the farther we get to the poles, the more struggle we will have.
And that ties in when we were talking about with transition, because it's the transition that's interesting, right?
That's right.
It's the blending of that. It's not the ocean, it's not the land, it's the shoreline. That is interesting, the tide.
The rush of both of those things together and apart, and together and apart. That's the key. That's the key. And the older I get, when you get to a point where you realize that you have less life ahead of you than you do behind you, you start to recognize truly what spirit is all about. And you recognize that heart-to-heart friendships are the key to life. Not what you own, not what you have, not whether this matches or that matches, or even if you're invited to a party you want to go to. It's about the ability to sit down with a friend like I am with you and talk, because we care enough about each other to share ideas. That is that is truly the spiritual awakening part of growing older and living and loving in this world.
Well, I mean, I couldn't agree more. I mean, that's you, that should, we should, that's a wrap. We should wrap it up on that. Unless you want to say something else. I mean, obviously you plugged your podcast. And believe me, we could have multiple conversations. We haven't even scratched the surface.
And if you add eggs and bacon, we're in big trouble because this
Oh
could
my
go
gosh.
on forever.
Pancakes and syrup for me. But.
There you go.
So what do you want? All right. So we good, Wendy?
We're good. Thank
Okay,
you so
great.
much, Patrick.
Well, thanks for your first, we'll call it your first appearance on this podcast.
Okay, deal.
Yeah, but I think that was great. So, all right, I'm going to stop the recording now. Thank you again so much. This has been
All right, take care.
okay.